A nearly 46-year-old mystery finally solved. A killer identified in the case of murdered teenager Carol Sue Klaber.
On June 5, 1976, the body of 16-year-old Carol Sue Klaber was found killed. Her family and the whole town of northern Kentucky were shocked and saddened by the news. Even though the case had been looked into for decades, it was still unsolved with no leads or suspects until new technology came along and helped solve the puzzle. Who could have done this to Carol, and how did the person do it for so long without being caught? Hello and welcome to our channel. If you are new here, please subscribe and press the bell notification. Let's have a look at the 47-year-old cold case finally solved in 2023, Carol Sue Klaber's case. So, let's jump right into this puzzle without further ado. Boone County is a county in the state of Kentucky in the United States. Daniel Boone, a frontiersman, was the inspiration for the name of the county, which was made in 1798. It has the fourth most people in Kentucky and is home to the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, which is a major hub for the area. Burlington is the county seat, and the county is known for its historic sites, places to enjoy the outdoors, and strong agricultural economy. In 1976, a terrible murder took place here in Boone. On November 28, 1959, a new life came into the world in the beautiful state of Kentucky. It was near some rolling hills and bubbling brooks. Daniel Henry Klaber and Betty Jane Meek Verniker were so happy as they held their beautiful baby girl and gave her the name Carol Sue Klaber. Her bigger brother, Thomas Klaber, watched in amazement and was excited to have a new sister. Carol was funny and liked to laugh. She was very humble for a girl, and she cared a lot about people who didn't have much. At the age of 16, she helped out at the St. Charles nursing home. Carol was a brownie and a Girl Scout when she was younger. She liked to cook, sew, listen to records, and listen to music all the time. At age 5, she also began taking piano classes. Carol was also learning to play the violin, and her piano teacher, Hattie Schatzman, picked her to be the student representative at the Ohio Music Teacher Association. At the Taft Museum, Carol played twice. Her love of music and natural ability made her a popular member of the string ensemble at Dixie Heights High School, and her friends liked her because she was friendly and outgoing. On June 5, 1976, the sun was shining strongly over the small town of Union, Kentucky, and everyone started their day as usual. Dr. Gaines Huey, a well-known dentist from Walton, left his home early to get to work, ready to take care of his customers' dental needs. He was driving down Chambers Road when he saw something strange at the side of the road. He stopped his car and walked toward the thing because he was interested in it. He didn't know what he had found until he was right next to it. A dead body lying still next to a culvert that let rainwater run off. He called the Kentucky State Police because he was shocked and his hands were shaking. That day, Trooper Jan Wuchner was on duty. Wuchner, a seasoned investigator who had worked for the Boone County Sheriff's Department before, rushed to the scene right away to figure out what had happened to the dead body on the side of the road. Around 7:15 a.m., agents from the Walton State Police Department got to the scene of the crime. Their eyes look around and look at every feature with great care. As the police started their investigation, they saw signs that someone had been fighting. Broken branches and trampled grass were signs of a violent fight, and a few feet away, the victim's body had wounds that showed she had been attacked and killed. With a rising sense of dread, the police realized that this wasn't a random act of violence, but a planned and deliberate killing. In their search for justice, the investigators were determined to look everywhere, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find any hard proof at the crime scene. They were upset about losing, so they chose to look for answers in the body of the victim. Her body was taken to the medical examiner's lab in the county for a full autopsy. The medical examiner carefully looked at every part of the victim's body for hints during the autopsy. Every cut, scar, and wound was carefully written down, and every hint was carefully looked at. The investigation showed the horrible truth about how she died. The proof showed that she had been brutally beaten, and her body showed signs that a tire iron had been used over and over again. The once beautiful face was now swollen and bruised, and the doctor saw deep cuts on her head, which were probably made by a blunt object. The heavy blow to her head had done damage that couldn't be fixed, so she died tragically and too soon. There were also clear signs of abuse and severe physical harm. The cause of death was finally found to be asphyxiation caused by manual strangulation and a blow to the head. This was a very sad time for everyone concerned. When this kind of cruelty was found, the study became even more important. When they looked at the evidence they found at the crime scene, they found some foreign DNA on the victim's clothes. Even though they tried hard, they couldn't match it to anyone who was known at the time. With the hope that technology would improve in the future, they kept the proof carefully, knowing that it could help solve the case one day. Detectives worked very hard and were able to find one of the family members who was the victim's brother. He got up the courage to come and identify the body with the help of the DNA that was taken from her body. Thomas Klaber, who was 23 at the time, walked into the morgue with heavy steps. As he looked at his sister Carol Sue Klaber's still, dead body on the cold metal table, tears ran down his face. When he realized that he would never again hear her infectious laugh or see her beautiful smile, the pain in his heart was too much to bear. As the probe moved forward, the police did not leave any stone unturned. They went all over the neighborhood, banging on doors and talking to people to find out anything that might help explain what happened. They also dug deep into Carol Sue Klaber's past by talking to her family and friends to learn more about her life and find out if she had any enemies. The police found out that June 4, 1976, was just like any other day for the Klaber family. Carol Sue Klaber, a carefree 16-year-old, got on her bike and went around town with a smile on her face and the wind in her hair. She said hello to the people who lived there, talked with her friends, and enjoyed the warm summer day. She planned to meet a friend at Zeno's Hyde Park restaurant in the evening. She left her house at 5:30 p.m., but as the sun started to go down, a young guy in a stylish Chevrolet Monte Carlo drove Carol back to her house. One of the neighbors said that she saw the young man and that he had sandy blonde hair, was a towering 6 feet tall, and had a slim body. They said a few words to each other, and then Carol went inside. The guy stayed outside and waited eagerly. After a few minutes, Carol came out of the house, got in the car with the man, and drove away. No one would ever see Carol alive again. Investigators spent a lot of time trying to find the owners of the suspected cars in the town, but the murder of Carol Sue Klaber was still not solved. The lines had dried up, and the case had hit a dead end, leaving detectives puzzled. The case went cold in the end, and it stayed that way for over 40 years. The investigation into who killed Carol Sue Klaber got a little bit brighter after years of being in the dark. Coy Cox and Tim Adams, two cold case officers from the Boone County Sheriff's Office, gave the case new life in 2017. Carol Sue Klaber was determined to find the truth and get justice. This led them to join forces with Jerry Keith, the original agent on the case, who had kept the case close to his heart even after he retired. The three people worked very hard. With the help of new technology, they carefully went through old data, talked to witnesses, and followed up on leads to put together a new view of a tragedy that had stumped them for years. The first thing they did was look into the two main suspects that Keith had already pointed out. The first person they looked at was a man who had a history of stealing cars and whose car looked a lot like the one Carol was last seen in. The detectives had their sights set on this man and gave him a lot of attention, trying to learn something useful from him. Even though he was a suspect in the case, the man said he had nothing to do with Carol's death. He told the officers about the bad things he had done in the past, but he insisted that Carol's murder was not his fault. So, the police took some of his DNA to compare with the DNA found on the victim's clothes in 1976. After an anxious wait for the DNA test results to come back in December 2018, Cox and Adams finally called the man. His DNA test came back negative, so he was no longer a suspect in Carol's death. When he realized he could finally breathe easy and start over, it felt like the weight of the world had been taken off his shoulders. After that, Cox and Adams went back to their never-ending search for the killer. There were no more clues about their first candidate, so they were back at the beginning. But then, in 2020, they chose to move on to their second suspect, who had been convicted of a brutal sexual assault in the same area just 2 years after Carol's murder in 1978. In 2020, he was 77 years old and went by the name Michael Dean Tate. As Cox and Adams worked on their case against Michael Dean Tate, they contacted the woman he attacked in 1978 to find out what happened. Even though her name was kept secret, People remembered the night well. She talked about how dark it was in Park Hills on October 1st, 1978, around 2 a.m., when she was violently attacked in her own garage. The victim remembered how she screamed and fought with all her strength, but her attacker seemed to enjoy making her hurt. But after 2 hours of hell, her attacker left her broken and bleeding, but still living. Tate's actions on that dark and fateful night left her with physical and mental scars that took years to heal. When Cox and Adams found out that Tate was involved in the 1978 case, they couldn't ignore the fact that he might have killed Carol. Tate worked in the area often in the 1970s and 1980s, around the same time that Carol was killed. This made him a strong possibility for the police to look into. Even though there was more and more proof against him, Tate insisted he was innocent and said he had nothing to do with Carol's death. The officers were hoping that their investigation would lead them to the person who did it. But their hopes were quickly dashed when the DNA analysis didn't match Tate's. Also, court records showed that Tate had been living in Cincinnati in 1976, so he couldn't have done the crime. The detectives wondered if they would ever be able to put an end to this secret that had been going on for decades. The case was still mysterious after it was put on hold again for almost 50 years. But on September 17, 2022, the Boone County Sheriff's Office called Othram Lab because they knew a lot about genetic history. The Othram team was asked to work on this case, and the Season of Justice gave them money to do so. The DNA from the 1976 crime scene was taken by the Kentucky State Police Central Forensic Center and sent to Othram Labs. Using advanced forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram's smart scientists were able to make a full DNA analysis for the suspect who was hard to find. They were able to find important genetic information that had been hidden for decades thanks to their cutting-edge technology. Genealogy experts at Othram Labs used forensic genetic genealogy to find research leads based on the detailed DNA profile they had made. When they found that some of Dunaway's son's DNA was similar to what they had found on Carol's body all those years ago, it was not an easy process. But the people involved determination had paid off, and they had found a solution that would put an end to the terrible events of 1976. The cops never stopped trying to figure out who killed Carol Sue Klaber. Thomas W. Dunaway, who was born on May 20, 1957, and was 19 years old at the time, was able to stay hidden for a long time. They kept looking until they found out important details about Dunaway's past and the terrible things he had done. The cops found out that he lived near Davo Park, which is where Carol was last seen with a man who looked like him. As they looked into it more, they found more proof against Dunaway. Dunaway wasn't just a one-time criminal. He had been on a crime spree for 6 months, and the cars he used to get away from each crime scene were a trail of proof. Even after Carol Sue Klaber died, the terrible things did not stop. 6 months later, in December 1976, he was found guilty of killing someone else. At the time, Ronald Townsend was only 19 years old. He was found dead and shot up on the ground. Thomas Dunaway, who killed Townsend, was caught and admitted to his crimes, which gave the town hope. He was given a life term, but Dunaway was let out of prison in 1984 after only 7.5 years. The question still stands: did justice get done, or was it just an illusion? Detective Coy Cox was the one who found out about the disturbing pattern of violence and sadness in Dunaway's life. Even though Carol's murder may not have been solved, the police were able to show how risky and deadly Dunaway's reign of terror was. Both Carol Sue Klaber and Ronald Townsend were killed, and their bodies were left in plain sight, just inches from the road. It was as if the killer wanted to make a point. As the investigation went on, the police found out that Dunaway was AWOL from the army at the time that Townsend was killed. 9 days after Carol died, Dunaway joined the service. At first, he was stationed at Fort Knox, but then he was moved to Fort Carson in Colorado. Even though Thomas Dunaway was in the service, he couldn't seem to stay out of trouble. Dunaway's love of cars was unmatched, but in the end, it was what brought him down. He was always looking for a good deal, so he turned in his favorite 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo for a bright orange Chevrolet Vega. But he had no idea that this flashy car would be the thing that caught the attention of the police who were looking into the murder of Ronald Townsend. Detectives kept looking for Dunaway and his orange Vega by putting out an all-points alert. The cat and mouse game ended on the dark night of Christmas Eve, 1976, when Dunaway was caught in South Carolina on charges of killing Townsend and illegally having a gun. As detectives dug deeper into the strange murder of Carol Sue Klaber, they were baffled by her relationship with Thomas Dunaway. Even though they might have known each other when they were kids in the Erlanger-Ellesmere Schools District, it wasn't clear how they were related as adults. But in the middle of all the chaos, Detective Coy Cox gave an important piece of information that could help solve the mystery: Carol's love for Davil Park. After getting the DNA samples, Othram Labs gave an answer in less than 2 months, which was a big surprise. On November 25, 2022, they looked at the killer's genetic information and found a link to a guy named Thomas W. Dunaway, who had died at the age of 33 in 1990. It came out that Dunaway had a son who had grown up without ever knowing his father. The agents went to meet with Thomas Dunaway's son, whose name was kept secret, so they could get DNA samples to compare. The answer to a mystery that had stumped police for a long time would be found in the results of these important lab tests. With a strong desire to find the truth and a strong desire for justice, they carefully gathered the samples they needed. On December 12, 2022, the long journey to solve the case was finally over. After almost 46 years, Carol Sue Klaber and her family finally got justice because the agents used new technology and never gave up. Carol had a soft spot in her heart for this green oasis, and it's possible that her love for the park led her to meet Dunaway by chance. She was known to be friendly, so she might have met him that way. Maybe they met by chance in the park, and as they shared stories and laughed in that quiet place, their lives became linked. One thing is for sure: the park is a big part of how they know each other. Dunaway lived close to where Carol used to ride her bike, so the park is an important part of how they know each other. When it was found out that Carol Sue Klaber's killer was Thomas Dunaway, it was both a relief and a sad moment. The police say the case is closed, but when the family heard that Dunaway had died on December 28, 1990, at the young age of 33, they felt sad and confused. Even though the Klaber family knows the truth, justice still seems hard to find. As Thomas Klaber cried, he couldn't help but wonder what justice meant now and wish he could have talked to Dunaway before his unexpected death. The fact that Carol was killed has been like a cloud following her brother around. He has been carrying this weight for almost 50 years, never being able to get rid of the fear that another tragedy could happen to his family. He is always worried about his 28-year-old son Daniel, even calling him late at night to check on him. He doesn't want to lose anyone else he loves the way he lost his beloved sister. It's a fear that grabs him like a vice and reminds him how precious every moment is and how important it is to love the people we care about. Thomas Klaber could not stand the thought of messing with the place where his sister was laid to rest. He felt bad that he would have to wake her up from her peaceful sleep to find her killer. But police were able to find another way. Instead of digging up Carol Sue's body, they dug up the body of the person who killed her. Even though Thomas didn't get the justice he had hoped for, the fact that his sister's grave hasn't been moved has given him a little comfort. Detective Cox was so determined to get justice that he recently got a court order to dig up Dunaway's body and test her DNA. The process of putting the DNA into Cody's could be the start of a new chapter in the search for justice, and Cox is ready for whatever comes next. Carol Sue Klaber finally got her day in court after almost 50 years. Even though the person who killed her can't be tried in court, Boone County Commonwealth's attorney Lewis Kelly says the case is over. Detective Cox had tears in his eyes when he told Carol's brother that the culprit had been found after all these years. It was a sad moment. Even though you can't change the past, knowing the truth is a small comfort in the face of such a terrible event. The murder of Carol Sue Klaber, which has been a secret for 46 years, was finally solved when Detective Coy Cox and his team found out that Thomas W. Dunaway did it. This case shows how hard law enforcement works to help victims and their families get justice, no matter how long it takes. What do you think about this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting true crime stories. Stay safe until next time, and keep an eye out for the next puzzle.